I supposed to get here? John?
How you doing?
There he is. You got a twin. So, JJ Dobbs, I heard you here.
How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And thanks for anybody who'd like to ask me questions or whatsoever. Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you. It's not walking across Pennsylvania.
That's
but
right. That's right. Obviously, you've been camped out a lot in Iowa for
Yes.
some time now. But you got in the race late. There's a lot of attention on other candidates. Kind of what keeps you going, and how do you think you can?
Well, you knew the reason I was in late, John, because my daughter's brain cancer. I had no choice. But we've been in about 9 weeks now, and we're actually tied for 9th in Iowa. 1%, but nevertheless, it's still where many people have been for the last 2 years. This is our first journey here to New Hampshire. And that's why I'm very appreciative of you here. As you know, I haven't been able to get into the Tier 1 media yet. We reach out, for example, Dave Ignatius has written 2 columns in the Washington Post saying no Democrat is talking about foreign policy. And he also said they're afraid to. So opportunities like this, John, are those that will, and we're working hard at it, will continue to get us that opportunity to get the message that you heard out there. When my getting in may be late, my message is very timely for America.
Do you, if you're unable to make the October debates, do you see yourself?
We're going all the way.
You're going all the way. What
Yep.
does that mean?
All the way through the primaries, you know. There comes a point in time, let's say Super Tuesday or something, you know. But our goal has been, as I told my staff, amateurs do tactics, experts do logistics. And so I told them we'll aim for the fall debates. Once I found out, for example, I have one of the 3 cable companies, I got a copy of an internal email that said Joe Sestak isn't going to be on. It wasn't mean, it was just, you know, like most of the establishment has said he's late. John's not establishment, though. I didn't mean it that way, although I can't believe the Inquirer still has you in Washington. But other than that, the issue here is that as soon as I realized and saw the memo that we weren't going to, we changed our strategy a little bit. Because and not complaining, because I landed on the beach, and you don't cry and go back to the landing craft. But basically, the decision had been kind of made, not for national media. We get great media in Iowa. You know, the largest newspaper has said experienced, smart, disciplined. And so we basically now have gone the ground game. We go everywhere in there and have done extraordinarily well. But then where I had thought perhaps we might be able to get on that Tier 1 national press, we've done very well in others like Quartz or Vox and others. So it's now upon me to point out that, hey, there is a voice out there, you know, like David Ignatius that says is talking about it. It is upon me to say, as you know, Tom Steyer was able to get an interview that, wait a moment, he was after. So I have to work at that. That's my job. But in the interim, what we decided to do is to begin to now move into New Hampshire and to work out here. As you saw the article yesterday, John, 90% of New Hampshire's, and I just talked to a Nassau committee person, haven't made up their mind. And you get to Iowa, you talk to the chair of Polk County, he said 2 months ago, 80% of Polk County, which is the largest, haven't made up their mind. I think it's somewhere between 60 and 80% across there. So we'll continue to work at that with the ground game, consistently trying to raise the funds now to get on media, social media, and television. And then eventually, sometime in the fall, we'll get into the debates.
Do you think you'll camp out in New Hampshire the way that you've been?
We're going to,
doing in
well, if you see
Iowa?
our schedule, which we sent you today, we'll be here for about 4 or 5 days. Then we're going to head back. But I'm going to come back much more quickly than I had initially planned. We have a strategy of ground game, air game, but the air game was going to be on national media. You know, not that we thought we should get a town hall, but at least we'd be on, you know, the Rachel Maddow's or the Good Morning Joes of the world. I mean, I did get on Neil Cavuto and Judge, but then they had one of them was canceled. But all that said, we then changed it slightly to say, do the ground game in both states, but also work very hard at making sure we can get on television and social media. And then eventually we'll rise up in the polls. 9's not too bad, including nationally. So, look, we all know that's 1%. But it is still there after only 9 weeks. And so we'll continue to work very hard, particularly if others tend to drop out. And how could anybody ask me to do that when I've just begun? I think there's a song like that, isn't it? Anyway, go ahead.
And just lastly, I mean, we've heard from almost 20 candidates today. What do you think you're offering that is different, that requires your voice to be in this race?
There are 2 primary things. The first, which is most important, and I hope you got it out from my speech today, is it demonstrated, and John, you know this in Pennsylvania, there's a demonstrated accountability to where you really are for people, above self, turning down all those lobbying jobs, above party, whereas, you know, you saw the consequences in the second race. I ran for Senate, where I stood against my party, but they put more money in on television ads, the DSCC did, against me, than they put in against Mitch McConnell 2 years earlier. And so the $6 to $8 million they put in total against me, because, as this good senator from a state nearby said, whenever I tell you anything, Sestak, the only answer is to yes. I said, I'm sorry. And so, and third, it is not just party, not just self, but special interest. And so, you know, I was willing to, for myself, is to turn that down and just go ahead and take those, do nonprofits afterwards. I think that's demonstrated for the deed, not just the word. And the fact that I represented a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district and could get reelected without a penny in the campaign, I think will stand well when this former Vice Admiral stands next to Mr. Trump and said, you know, we both kind of failed our physical during the Vietnam era. But I happened to memorize the eye chart on the way out, so I could come back a second time and pass it. You know, and then to say, you know, to actually have people, as you've seen on my Twitter, who said, look, I'm a Republican, but if you're the nominee, I'll vote for you. As I said, if we do not, I don't want to govern a different way than I'm going to run. And I'm not running on outrage. I'm running on, yes, point out the wrong policies, but we have to unite this country to make it. The second thing is, no one has the depth and breadth of global experience I have. I don't say that for Joe Sestak. I say that because this nation invested in me, very consciously, from studying for that doctorate to work for a warrior named General Colin Powell, political military assessments, to the White House, to understand all the elements of our power, the power of our military, but the limitations upon it, the power of our diplomacy, our economy, the power from our ideals and bringing them together. And that is extraordinarily important, because the greatest strength of America is not its military, it's not its economy, it's not even, it is kind of its diplomacy, it's the power to convene, to bring together nations and peoples of the world for a common cause, to serve us all. And I think that's what's most damaging about what Mr. Trump is doing today. Instead of convening the world, the European Union, Japan, those 40% of the GDP nations that are actually 40% of the world's GDP of those nations in TPP, and convening them together and fixing the World Trade Organization with new rules that we founded when it was GATT and turned it in, and then saying, Japan, there'll only be justice in how you go about the world in trade. That's the only way to do it, not by scattershots. And I think that is extraordinarily missing on the stage of the Democratic and certainly the Republican side. But that accountability for people above all is what is most needed to unite this country, or we're not going to make it. We'll just have another president that can do executive orders. I bored you that quickly?
Mr. Sestak,
Joe.
New Hampshire has been home to
I'm sorry, say again?
New Hampshire has been home to a number of underdog wins. It's also a primary, which makes it a little bit easier sometimes to organize. So, as someone who is slightly lesser known, why start out in Iowa, and why not just try your luck in New Hampshire?
Because I thought Iowa was exactly what you said. It is a little more difficult because you have to do caucus organization. I think there's, I've forgotten the exact number, it's like 1,600 plus caucus things. So the concept was, go to Iowa first, go everywhere, because what we had picked up, as this is not me talking, this is a Polk County Democrat, who said, the other people are kind of like celebrities. They were well known before the race began, so when they come into Iowa, they don't go to the rural central committee meetings. What they do is they come in and have large gatherings, usually of the same people, repeated. This is what they said, okay? But you are different. You're going to every central committee meeting. So what we did is we consciously went to 20 counties, 2 or 3 times before we moved on to the next 20. Because I don't do grassroots or go grass seeds. I want to put it down and grow it up. And so I keep moving and moving and moving. But as we're doing it, I have a person who's collecting names in order to do the caucuses. Now I can come to the primary state, having set that up, and then spend a lot more time here, as I said, as our strategy has changed. But that is, caucuses are pretty tough. And because, you know, it can have trade-offs in there, it's a lot of teaching of how to do it well. So that's why I try to use that phrase, amateurs do tactics, experts do logistics. It's nice to have an idea, but how do you logistically do this? So will we get there on the debate stage? Yeah, we'll get there at some time. But there's going to be 6 or 8 more, and I can't tell you, the last debate show didn't make much movement, did it?
Congressman,
Yes.
in terms of your foreign policy
Yes, sir.
beliefs, we have, on one hand, we had General Mattis recently being critical of Vice President Biden in terms of insisting on pulling out troops in Iraq that created ISIS. On the other hand, we just actually spoke to a candidate that said even if Article 5 was executed by NATO, that they may or may not abide by that in terms of, you know, executing Article 5. Where do you fall in that whole spectrum?
Where I find is that America's leadership has to be restored to the world. But when you make a decision of whether to go to war, as I said out there on the podium, you better know how it's going to end before deciding how it will begin. So for example, to your question on NATO, when I arrived in the Arabian Sea, I had 10 ships built around an aircraft carrier battle group. Waiting there for us were 20 ships and an international armada. Japan was there. They hadn't been outside the Sea of Japan since the Second World War. And alongside them was Germany. Ships had been sent from all over the globe. Across the Atlantic came Canada. From the Pacific came Australia. And the Italian Minister of Defense said it pretty well for why they all came. Some may think he said, we Italians are better lovers than warriors. But America has been attacked and we will be there for them. We had convened the world for a common cause that serves us all. But then, when I took my aircraft carrier battle through the Straits of Hormuz to begin the precursor strikes against Iraq, only 2 of those countries went with us because they understood that you better know how it's going to end before it begins, and our leaders couldn't tell them. So where I sit is there are 3 important national security interests to America. Vital. You'll do anything like World War II to win. Important. That changes the character of the world that over time can harm us. Bosnia. And humanitarian like Rwanda, where we did not respond, not with military force, but with military forces that could have set up some security against the machete-wielding genocide type of people and just for humanitarian purposes done it. Where I did work is you look at the interest of the United States of America in those 3 categories. Having signed up to the NATO agreement, though, if Estonia or Poland, who is in NATO, is attacked by Russia, extremely unlikely, but threatened, yes, I will be there for them. The sculpture that's closest to the Oval Office is not of an American. It's of a foreigner, placed there consciously by our forefathers to remind the President and the Commander-in-Chief that we had won our freedom because of an ally. And that person, General Rauschenbaugh, still sits closest to the Oval Office today to remind the President that we won our freedom and can only maintain it with our allies. Not in honor of the general, because he convinced a reluctant George Washington to go to the Battle of Yorktown and win our freedom, and he commanded U.S. and French troops. So the issue is this. If we convene the world correctly, like the world's greatest generation did after World War II, and we did not do after World War I, and we had to fight a second World War, the world's greatest generation convened the world through NATO and 67 other countries that all came together, and through the World Trade Organization, through the UN, through the IMF, through the World Bank, and actually won the third Cold War, the Cold War without a shot. That's how I approach it. And then if someone does mischief, then you assess that in your security interest of those 3 categories I said. But you better know the limitations of military. We fixed Iran with the power of our diplomacy and economic sanctions, even with strange bedfellows like Russia and China. And now we broke our word? And we're going to fix it with our military when our carrier battle groups can't even survive in the Persian Gulf because we can't find their 19 mini submarines with our sonar? That was a little long, wasn't it? But that's what we have to remember, is that Commander-in-Chief and President has to make that assessment each and every time. But when you sign a treaty, you've done it because you know that there is impending doom, potentially from a revanchist Russia. Yes, sir.
Wondering
I
why
like
you
your hat.
retired from Congress so early.
Say again?
Why you retired from Congress so early.
Well, that's a great question. I ran for the Senate against Senator Arlen Specter. I totally disagreed. But someone, even a former president, Mr. Clinton, called me and said, you should run for your same job primary at the same time, because I could have. And I said, no, sir, this is about accountability. Because if I'm running against a person who switched parties because he couldn't win in the Republican primary against the incoming Pat Toomey, how can I say to everyone, I'm just got a safety job here in case I don't run against him, when I was saying, and I put out a video that said, that's the gentleman who humiliated Anita Hill. It doesn't stand. So yeah, even Mr. Clinton said you should. I think he probably said it because he wasn't sure I could win. But no, we were 40 points down in my first poll. Just like in my first poll against Mr. Weldon, I was 30 points down. But I'm ninth now, John. Go ahead.
You retired early from Admiralty.
Say again?
You were an admiral, retired early.
Yeah, well, here's what happened. If you go on my website, it's there. I proposed, I'm sorry. So I have to end?
No, please finish the question.
Okay, I proposed 300, we used to have 360 ships in the Navy. As you probably know, I proposed 260. Because I saw a future that should not have been built around force structure. It should have been built around force capability. So instead of, I was in charge of the Navy's I was a three-star, I was in charge of the Navy's $350 billion 5-year program. So I proposed that instead of 54 submarines, it should only be 34, 35. Because if you, pardon me?
I'm from Connecticut.
So you're right. And actually, I had to go brief Senator Lieberman and Senator Dodds. And when Senator Dodds later came in, I shouldn't have said this, but when he later came into my district, he said, Joe, you're the admiral that wanted to cut my submarine fleet. But I did, because if you saw the New York Times article 2 months ago, and I couldn't talk about it at the time, and only a few of us were read into the programs, that they talked about a different program, quantum sensors, that now can see a submarine moving underwater 1,000 feet underneath, because it pumps up the water imperceptibly until you had quantum sensors that could go back and actually in supercomputers tell you there's a submarine there. Water's becoming translucent, not transparent. And so we're building a military today, and this is on my website, the announcement video that, but it said, everybody says slash the military. Wait a moment. I said that back when I was a 3-star admiral, that we can have less force structure. We only need 9 aircraft carriers. We had 12 at the time. And we can do more as long as we harness cyberspace. And that's what we haven't done. So that's why a gentleman who worked for me is now commander of the Pacific said last year, we now no longer command the Western Pacific. The first loss is command of the seas by the United States Navy since the Second World War. It doesn't take more money. It takes stop building structure and transfer to capability. Take down that radar with cyberspace. You don't have to sink it with weapons. It's a lot to be done, and that's why, to his point, when Dave Ignatius says nobody's talking about foreign policy, it's my job incumbent upon me to get out there and say, yeah, there is somebody who has breadth and depth of it. I didn't just serve. I was fortunate that this nation invested in me to be at the White House, to be Colin Powell, to watch reductions in forces, to watch peace and prosperity in the Clinton administration. To your great question, sir, of how to manage all the elements of our power so that we can win again the peace against the liberal world order, China, that Malaysia has called, Prime Minister, the new neo-colonialist power. 2 ports, Cambodia and Djibouti, have now been given to China for overseas naval bases. You saw that. Because of the predatory loans that forced them to give it.
Trump doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't get it. I don't think a lot of people get this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral.